I'm starting on slide 13, which is character categorizing, which is based off the previous slide 12 that Jackie was talking about, that deals with pessimistic versus optimistic, and where she has all the different quotes about different characters. So the intention for this is we're going to do a name game, and everybody would go and get up, and these signs would be hanging around the room. They're for Simon, Roger, Ralph, Piggy, and Sam and Eric, and they would go around the room, and we would say which one is most optimistic, and they would go and stand at the character that they thought was most optimistic, which for me is probably either Sam and Eric or Piggy, because Sam and Eric, they always are trying to get others out of the situation instead of like at the end of the book when they're just helping Ralph escape from him being killed, and telling him that he is going to be potentially killed. Then he's I don't know, they're just trying to fix the situation, and they're there for them. And then Piggy, he's optimistic because he doesn't think that the fighting should be happening, and he's we can fix this, we can get over it, because at the scene right before he got killed, he brought the conch shell, and he was this is our power, we need to take turns talking, and that's how we're gonna fix this, and it's gonna get better. And then even though Jack didn't agree with him, he still was we can fix this, it's gonna be okay, we just need to stick with the plan and stick with the conch shell being the main source of power. And then we would transition to which is next down the line until we got to most pessimistic, which is probably Roger, because he's just Jack, he's just kind of his Jack's wingman, and he wants to hurt everybody if they don't agree with him, I feel so that would be what we would do for this game. And so then as we would go around the room for each character, we would stop and discuss what we thought, and then we'd see what everybody else thought, kind of what the friendship group did with the one game. The next slide I'm talking about is my text evidence slide, and on this slide is just text evidence for places where we saw the teen's brain and their development throughout the book, relating back to what Emma talked about in the first few slides. The first example is on page 10. It says, he was old enough, 12 years old and a few months. He had lost the prominent tummy of childhood. And I said that this section is talking about how Ralph is, he's the older one, and his body is developed, and he is considered the leader because of this, and how he's gonna have more of a developed brain because he's less of a child and more developed into a teen. And then this also relates to when she talked about earlier. She says, however, science says your brain is not fully developed until 25 years old in men. The reader can predict that this would lead to some problems in the future, which it did in the story, because they ended up not being able to have a successful leader because he was younger. The next text example is on page 50. It says, they're hopeless. The older ones aren't much better. Do you see? All day I've been working with Simon, no one else. They're off bathing, eating, or playing. And this shows that the teens are the ones who are taking responsibility, because they know in their brain that to be able to survive, they have to get the food, they have to build the shelter, they have to plan out the fire and stuff like that. the other kids, they're not very worried about that kind of thing. They're just worried about, like, oh, we just got on an island, like, stuff like that, just, like, playing around. And I said, this quote shows that the little ones are not mentally realizing the situation they're in. They're also relying on the older boys to play their parental role, which we've talked about throughout, how the little kids look up to the older ones as their parent because they don't have a parent that's there. And then the last piece of text I used on page 59, and it says, the smaller boys were known now by the genetic title of little ones. The decrease in size from Ralph down, recognizing big uns at one end and little ones at the other. The boy's brain sees them as stereotypes and not as age. To them, they think the boys should have been in power in the beginning. They put the powerful ones in the parental role, even though they might not have all the qualifications. The little boys just want to fill that parental role for protection. And this also, like, relates to their brain because the brain wants to separate the ages, and so they don't really know everyone's ages. Instead of asking, they're just like, you look smaller and you look bigger, and that's how their brain decides to categorize them. And then the last slide I'm talking about is 18, and it's our hot questions discussion, and we picked questions 1, 3, 4, and 7. The first one is, how does Piggy show that his brain is more developed than the others throughout the text? Think about the reasoning and use the text. And then we were going to kind of have like a, not necessarily pop-up, but like a, what do people think? And this was Danny's question. So the answer that our group came up with was, throughout the text, it is seen that Piggy's brain is more developed than the other boys by the words that come out of his mouth as a reaction to the other boys' actions. As Ralph explains to the boys, they must make a fire right after their first meeting. The little boys run full of noise and movement, which then Piggy thinks is immature of them and calls the boys' actions those of a crowd of kids. 19. Later in the text, after the first fire sets a huge portion of the island in flames, the reader understands why Piggy feels this way when he brings up the fact that no shelter was made for safety. After explaining to the boys that they should have built shelters first place, Piggy repeats himself and calls out to the boys, being a pack of kids. In 23. Piggy is indignant by the boys' reckless actions. However, he does not have a powerful voice due to the group. His looks, he cannot act on it properly. And so then we would just see what everybody else thinks before reading what we said. The next question is going back to what Emma talked about with the amygdala, and it says the amygdala is responsible for aggression in the teenage brain. What actions from Jack and Roger show that their amygdala is the one taking the lead? Use the text. And our answer was, Jack and Roger show actions that prove that the amygdala is controlling them. In the text, both Jack and Roger were involved in the killing of Simon. Their emotions took over because they, Jack and Roger, thought that he was the beast. They faced aggression and madness. This led to them in their idea to kill. The amygdala took over and made them act with aggression towards Simon. And I would also like to add on to this that, like, their, like, emotions of, like, not wanting to admit that they were wrong took over in this scene too, because afterwards it was Ralph and Piggy, I think, were talking to one of the other boys, and they were saying, like, oh, we left at this part, and it was right before they had killed Simon, and they didn't want to, like, go back and admit, like, yeah, I was there. they were both like, oh yeah, we left before that happened. And so their brain tells them that, like, you don't need to admit to this, and that, like, takes over, and it, like, builds up on them. And then the next one is question number 4. How do the boys' actions throughout the story prove that their brain is still maturing or developing? Use the text. We said the boys argue and fight a lot over little stupid things, and can tell, and that their brains aren't completely matured yet. For instance, they could see that the dead pilot of his parachute, and they immediately saw it as a beast. When Simon found the beast, no one could believe him, and he was killed when they told them that he found him. Simon wasn't given a chance to explain himself before they attacked him. This is an example of how their brains are still maturing. They wouldn't even listen to Simon when they tried to explain what he found. This is basically saying that, like, they just jump to conclusions, kind of going back to what question 3 talked about with the amygdala. That is, like, the response. It took over, and they never give Simon the chance to explain that it really wasn't a beast, or, like, even why, because Jack just wants everybody to be scared of something, and he sees it as, like, a powerful place to get in. The last hot question that we're talking about is question number 7. It says, throughout the text, what difference do the boys notice what difference do you notice between the behaviors of the younger and older boys? And we said, a difference in behavior between the younger and older boys is clearly shown throughout the text. The older boys have more developed brains. They feel the need to take responsibility and lead others. They also are more aggressive and fight more. The younger boys are more timid, particularly at the beginning, and looking for someone to take control of the situation and lead the parental figure. And so that kind of keeps going back to the little boys just want a parental figure to be shown throughout the text, and as they grow up, they become the parental figure, and they're less of the acting parental figure.